Hey kids, this is video number 2. If you haven't viewed video number 1 and looked at the examples I gave you, do that first, then come back here. Once you've done that, a second way to kind of demystify poetry and begin to understand it, to be able to analyze it, is to understand that unless you're reading a poem translated from another language. If you're reading a poem written in English, then most poets are pretty good about following some of the standard rules of English grammar. Um, for instance, if you see a period, that's going to be the end of a thought, just like this period at the end of a sentence is the end of a thought. So when you see a period, if you don't understand exactly what's been going on, just back up from the period, and you usually find a noun and a verb back there somewhere, although they may not be in the expected order. Same thing, colons, semicolons, commas, dashes. Emily Dickinson, the famous woman poet from Massachusetts, was famous for using dashes. In fact, it's a dead giveaway for Emily Dickinson's poetry. It's got a bunch of dashes in it. So look at the grammar. It's English. It's the English language, convoluted most of the time in interesting ways, which is what makes it poetry. But the rules of grammar still apply, with another exception I'm going to tell you about. So look at the punctuation. The punctuation, just like in an essay or a short story, the punctuation helps you see how the thoughts are grouped together. The second thing is that although the thoughts are grouped together, they may not be grouped in the expected ways. Sometimes one of the most common poetic devices that lots of poets use is they'll mix around the word order. And I'm going to give you an example to look at. The verb will come before the noun or something like that. So the normal, even though it looks like a sentence, and it is a kind of a sentence, the word order may be reversed or mixed up in interesting ways in order to create, and they do that in order to create the right rhythm that they want to hear. They're hearing it in their heads and they want you to hear it in your head and when you read it aloud. So sometimes they mix words around. The other thing is sometimes the case of a word, like is it a noun or a verb or an adjective or an adverb, sometimes they change those around. And I'm going to give you an example of that. I'm going to give you an example of another one of my favorite poems by E. E. Cummings called I Thank You God for Most This Amazing Day. And you will find that he's done both of those things. He's mixed around word order in his sentences, and he's changed the case of some things, of some of the words. For instance, for most this amazing day, most would normally be a quantitative adjective of some kind. And what he really means there is mostly, the adjective mostly, M-O-S-T-L-Y. But because of his rhythms, and that also because that's what E. E. Cummings loved to do, he's changed mostly to most, but it still functions as an adverb. So again, basic rules of English grammar are quite often a very good way to unpack a poem. If it looks like a sentence, it probably is. And so your job as a reader of a poetic line is to perhaps take it out of the poetic form and write it out as a regular sentence. And notice where nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs and prepositions and things like that are used in ways that don't necessarily conform to the rule. So you may have to translate, for instance, most back into mostly, and make that line into a sentence, and then it makes sense. But it doesn't have what poets call scan. To scan means the line doesn't fit together as poetry. It may be a perfectly fine sentence, but it doesn't fit together as poetry. So they make all sorts of alterations, but it's still basic English grammar with a few little riffs on it. So those are the two things. Number one, see if you can categorize the poem as a beginning way to understand it. Again, please let me say, if categorizing is all you do, you haven't done anything yet. But if you're having trouble understanding a poem or visualizing it, then try to categorize it in one of those three categories, and that will help you move beyond the mere appearance of the thing. And then the second thing is look at the grammar, look at the sentences, look at the punctuation, look at particularly adverbs and adjectives, and sometimes nouns as well. And look if they're used in a way that you'd expect them to be used. And if they're not used in a way you'd expect them to be used, then see if you can come up with a word that does fit the case that you're looking at. And that, again, will not destroy the poem. It will help you understand it, so when you put it back together, you get what's going on. Both of those things are relatively simple and not mysterious, and not really any more difficult than reading an essay or a letter or something like one of those prose things that we've been talking about. Those are beginnings of ways to say, yes, I really can understand this poem. It's not complete gibberish. It's not a mystery. I can understand it. And then once you establish those basic parameters, then you use that to go beyond and interpret and understand and appreciate the beauty of the poetry. But the beauty and the elegance and the moving parts of poetry are quite often on the other side of basic concerns like grammar and sentence structure and so forth. Okay, my phone's ringing, gotta go. See you later.